Peter Nation, I have the honor of welcoming. He comes from Vancouver, and he will be giving 2 workshops, which will be different. So if you're attending this one, there's still a lot of benefit of attending the second one. It's not the same one being given both. It's kind of progressing on the idea, so actually there would be a lot of benefit of attending the second one as well. Peter has an honors BA in philosophy and a master's degree in religious education. He was a high school teacher for 28 years, most of them at St. Thomas Aquinas in North Vancouver, where he taught grade 11 and 12 students and was the head of the religion department. Having been born a high Anglican, Peter became an atheistic existentialist at university, then a seeker after psychological self-actualization, then a follower of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and a full-time transcendental meditation teacher, and finally, for 12 years, a New Age cult member, before being received into full communion with the Catholic Church in 1988. It's quite a biography. He and his wife have 1 daughter. In 2013, he retired from teaching, and for the first year and a half, checked off a big item from his bucket list, training full-time and doing the 3 Spartan runs and the Tough Mudder. He is currently one of the co-coordinators of Catholic Voices Canada, an organization which is now focusing on training Catholics to shed light rather than generate heat in conversations with family members and friends on hot-button issues of concern to the Church and Canadian society. Before we begin, let's just pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
So Peter, the pleasure of introducing you, and let's all give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. If I were you, I would not be here. I would be at the other interesting presentations that have been given. So thank you very, very much for coming. Just sort of out of curiosity, since I've had such a weird background, any of you or your parents ever did transcendental meditation? No? Okay. And I partly mentioned this Tough Mudder thing because in somewhere nearby, you guys have got one of the Spartan runs. You have the Super Spartan, 14 kilometers, 20 obstacles. Anybody participated in that? My goodness, what's the matter with you? Okay. Our organization is named Catholic Voices, but I'm hoping that we're not all papists who are here. Good. So this is not just a Catholic issue. It's not just a Catholic organization, or it's not just an organization that addresses Catholic issues. So please tell your friends they're very, very welcome, if they're not Catholics, to come to the second presentation this afternoon. And I am responsible to state that for the purposes of this conference, I cannot identify any conflict of interest, although, of course, there's the conflict between the culture of life and the culture of death, which I definitely am involved in. Okay, so as an organization, we have a 5-year history. We're a young group that got started in England in 2010, and those are some pictures of people in different countries who have been trained to present the Church's position to the media on various hot-button issues, including some Vancouverites there. How Catholic Voices started was quite interesting. Probably you remember the book and the movie, The Da Vinci Code. And part of the, well, you could say slander if you wanted to, or profound misunderstandings about the Church, and particularly about an organization within the Church called Opus Dei, was that this book and this movie featured some very, very strange kinds of information. I have to hand it to Dan Brown. I was impressed by the fact he spelled the word Catholic correctly. He spelled Opus Dei correctly. But at that point, a number of smart people got together and thought about how to not just defend the church, but to do so in a way that did not alienate the people that they were wanting to talk to. And the expression was that they sort of figured out how to make lemonade out of the lemon, which was the book and the movie. So then there was another situation that occurred, and which was a very interesting one. In 2009, a couple of years later, there was a particular topic in a program in London, I think it is, called Intelligence Squared, where they have public debates on various issues. And the debate that they had then was, be it resolved that the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world. And the way these debates proceeded was, before the presentation, they would have everybody vote on what they thought, and then after the presentation, they'd heard good speakers on each side. They'd re-vote and see how influential the presentations were. So they did so, and before, there were 678 people were in favor of the resolution, Church is a Force for Good, 1,100 weren't. Then they had the debate, and you can see a cardinal on the left-hand end. I think the other one was a lawyer speaking on behalf of the church. And on the right-hand side, I don't know if it's clear enough, but I believe that's Christopher Hitchens there. And in any case, they had the debate, and then people voted again, and this was the result. Okay, sorry. The people in favor went from 670 to 260, and the people against went from 1,100 to 1,800. So it was obviously a totally disastrous result. These are very highly intelligent people and defending the church's position. So the question is obvious: how on earth can we speak about what we believe as Christians, as Catholics, in a way that doesn't make more people against us when we finish talking? So this was sort of the germ of the concepts that came together for this Catholic Voices approach to dealing with the media. Then the next big event, and this was the one that the organization Catholic Voices in the United Kingdom sort of used as a springboard into the public square. So the Holy Father was going there to beatify Cardinal Newman, and massive protests. People wanted to take him to the International Human Rights Tribunal in The Hague and charge him for all the crimes in humanity that have ever happened, complaining about the cost to the country of the visit. And so about 100, I believe it was, forget that slide right so far, but about 100 news requests came from media, TV and radio for Catholic Voices. They did a very good job. The bishops liked them. The media liked them because they were well informed. They weren't defensive. They weren't aggressive. They made the media look good. They produced a good show. And so Catholic Voices got quite successfully launched at that time. So what are some of the ideas behind Catholic Voices, the philosophy of it, so to speak? Training ordinary lay Catholics to speak to the media. That's one thing that's fairly distinctive. Mostly official spokespersons for dioceses and archdioceses are priests, or sometimes not. But these people who were trained by Catholic Voices were young faces, fresh faces, and just the appearance of them was kind of disorienting to the typical listener or viewer. And so, it kind of created a positive difference in Catholic spokespersons. There's a lot of media training that goes into developing somebody to be able to do this. It's an organization that is run by lay people. It's blessed by the bishops, but it is not. We are not official spokespersons for the church wherever we are active, and which is convenient for the bishops, because if a Catholic voice puts his foot in his mouth, the bishop can say, well, he's not an official spokesperson. On the other hand, it frees us up to be a little bit maybe more personal in an interview or the way we deal with media. I like to crack jokes, and so I can do that. Whereas if I were the official archdiocesan spokesperson, I would just have to be very kind of straight ahead. This is what the church teaching on this is. So some of the issues, and unfortunately, the bookstore wasn't able to get our Bible for you to purchase, which I know you all would have loved to have done. You would have rushed out and bought several copies. I had one guy at a presentation afterwards. He literally ran up to me, handed me a $100 bill, and said, "I've got a big family. Give me all I can get for $100." So I love that kind of person. I feel a lot of Christian, agape towards him. But the book covers issues that some of which are specifically to do with the Catholic Church, and others are more widely relevant for any Canadian citizen and any Christian, anyone. So, for instance, pardon me?
What's the name of the book?
The title is How to Defend the Faith Without Raising Your Voice. And it's by Austin Ivory, who's one of the 4 co-founders of the Catholic Voices in the United Kingdom, and who's just written a very, very insightful and useful biography of Pope Francis called Francis the Reformer, or something like that. Anyways, I could highly recommend it. Austin Ivory is his name. Yeah. Pass this around? Sure, but don't sneak out with it, okay? So some of the issues it addresses: the church and political life, homosexuality and contraception, equality and religious freedom, assisted suicide, clerical sexual abuse, defending the unborn, Catholics and AIDS in Africa, the condom comment that Pope Benedict made on the airplane, keeping marriage conjugal, and women and the church. So I think it's a helpful one. Yeah, please have a look at it, pass it around. Okay, so really a fundamental aspect of the Catholic Voices approach is to take a positive approach towards the media, recognizing the value that they have. They perform a service in society, which is a very important service. They hold us to account, and in a sense, however difficult that is for us sometimes, thank God for it, because we have been known for covering up things, particularly with respect to the sexual abuse scandal. That's not good for the church, and it was a good thing overall that secular media held us to account. Although they weren't the first to do that, it was the Catholic Reporter that beat the rest of the secular media. Once they did that, then the secular media got on to the issue. They have the right to ask hard questions, and when we do our trainings, and we practice and we know our stuff, it's really fun to get hard questions. The harder, the better. There is in a sense, I think, a rather profound misperception of the media from most Catholics. That is, that they're really against us. They're out to make us look bad. They're out to attack the church. Now, the Catholic Voices UK answer to that is no. That's really not the case. Now, I have to clarify the situation, because being in Vancouver and being in Canada is not the same as in the UK. BBC is known for their objectivity, whereas CBC is not so much. And in Vancouver, interestingly and uniquely, it's not that the media are particularly anti-Catholic. It's that the Catholic Church simply does not exist on their radar. So actually, we trained about 10 or a dozen people in the Archdiocese of Vancouver. 3 of them were official archdiocesan spokespersons whom we were paid to train. And we almost got no calls from the media for interviews. The last one I got was from the comment that the Pope made that people interpreted about dogs going to heaven. And I lost out. I didn't get the media because the bishop in Victoria is a dog lover, so he was a cooler guy being a bishop plus a dog lover than I was. I like dogs, but I don't have one. I can't speak from experience. So, and so every 3 months, I might get a call from the media. It's just Catholic things are just not of interest. So it's not that they're anti-us, But interestingly, in the UK, one thing that they did to sort of kind of evaluate, where does the media stand with respect to the church is just simply Google Catholic Church. The top 10 items that popped up at the point that he did this, they were all neutral or Catholic positive. Yes, sir?
Why do you say anti-Catholic? I would have said anti-Christian.
I say that because I am not a sophisticated ecumenist. And I apologize. And so, yeah, just, no, it just was sort of a knee-jerk term that I used.
You
And
wouldn't disagree with the fact that they're perceived to be anti-Christians?
no, I wouldn't disagree with that. No. Unless, you know something more that I know and that they love you more than they love me.
I just want to be part of the group.
Yeah, although interestingly, one presentation that I gave in the advertising, we intentionally didn't use the word Catholic, we used the word Christian, and a Lutheran minister wrote a letter to the local newspaper complaining and saying that she was a Christian and she was in favor of assisted suicide. So you can't win. I was trying to be inclusive and at that time. Okay. So 100 invitations to the media when the Pope came to the UK. The next big event in the church was Pope Francis's election. There were 200 interview invitations. So they realized, wow, this has some traction, this particular approach to speaking to the media and representing the church in the public square. So set it up as a global project. Here, the guy with the glasses is Austin Ivory. He's got a peculiar British way of spelling his name, and so it's on the title on the cover of the book that's going around. I just came back from a conference in Rome of the coordinators from 20 countries in the world now who have set Catholic Voices up, and that was a wonderful experience. I was going to say we had Archbishop Pell for lunch, but not literally. He came to where we were staying and ate with us and gave us a talk. We had a meeting with Father Lombardi, the Pope's official spokesperson. We had a talk from the second top guy at the so-called Vatican Bank, the second guy in charge of the committee that is working out the church's policies, assisting and supporting victims of sexual abuse, priestly sexual abuse. So it was a really wonderful opportunity for us, and a very positive indication to Catholic Voices that the highest echelons of the church find what we do to be helpful. Okay, so a couple of the books that have been written. A very, very helpful website that I would recommend to you, Catholic Voices Comment. Very balanced, very up to date, and it's on the issues that we're asked to speak on, but they are the issues that any practicing Catholic or perhaps Christian would be interested in kind of getting the background information on. So if they're talking about dogs going to heaven, probably there was an article that would have clarified that. So we started in Canada. We incorporated at the beginning of last year. We're in the process of getting charitable status from the federal government, because I know that you're really warming up to making a donation for us, and just so you know, you'll get a tax receipt, and that's very easy to do now because you've got another organization that helps us out. We trained those people, as I mentioned, 10 or a dozen people, and Jack and Austin flew here for a long weekend at a retreat center in Vancouver to complete about 50, 60 hours of media training. Then what we found is that what I described already, the media were not particularly interested in our voices. And something happened, as I mentioned on the mic the other day, that an organization called the Catholic Women's League in Vancouver all of a sudden became very, very interested in our presentation on assisted suicide. And so we realized, wow, this it seems to be where the Holy Spirit is leading us as an organization. So what we call that is Catholic Voices Academy. Catholic Voices, training people for media. Catholic Voices Academy, training ordinary lay people and clergy, whoever else, to speak to friends, family members, co-workers on these same hot-button issues. And coming right down to it, how we see what we're doing is evangelizing the culture friend by friend. So it's a long-term project, but one we feel will be very effective in the long term. So, Catholic Voices approach, some more specifics about it. Okay, so controversial issue comes up. The response that we try our best to have is not being angry, not feeling we're being pillared, keeping our cool, not jumping into it, whipping out the sword and the shield and going on the attack. Not being defensive, being brave, not being too frightened to hope nobody is going to raise the issue that is embarrassing. If it's some of these issues are embarrassing. Others, like suicide, the church isn't being nailed for being against it. So that's an easier one to deal with. But some of the others, again, for instance, Indian residential schools, it's a huge issue which most Canadians, let's face it, would rather avoid addressing with their friends. But Catholic Voices equips somebody to not be afraid or how, and deal with a conversation with somebody on that kind of an issue.
Please speak louder.
Sorry, thank you. Okay, so when these hot button issues come up, it is not a question of surviving the storm, but of dancing in the rain. And rather than taking what I think is a sort of a culture war perspective here, we take what we hope is a supernatural perspective. So we know this beautiful saying, I think it's from Romans, in everything God works for good with those who love him. So I do get criticized about Catholic Voices not being feisty enough, not being direct enough. And I have to explain that our particular style and sort of approach and philosophy is not one which, for some of us we love. Michael Corns is a good example. God bless the currently Anglican gentleman. I'm not sure what church he goes to now. Some guys are great at the debate, the controversy, the provocative stuff. Okay, wonderful. But Catholic Voices' approach is to try to shed light without generating heat, and no matter how tempting it is to generate a little bit of heat and how fun it is, we try to discipline ourselves. So with respect to the issues that the church directly gets criticized on, interesting statement from Second Vatican Council. The church admits that she has greatly profited and still profits from the antagonism of those who oppose or who persecute her. So the idea there is, when else actually do we find the secular culture expressing interest in what Catholic ideas are on any particular subject? It's only when the controversial ones surface. They're not asking us how much we love Scripture. CBC isn't phoning, how's your interior life? How's your spiritual life? So as difficult and as uncomfortable sometimes as it is, when the issue is a controversial issue to address, how we see it is that this is a wonderful opportunity to present what the church believes. The church is okay. So one of the very first things that a voice does, whether in a media interview or in a conversation with a friend that might think differently about any of these topics, is to find the positive intention behind their point of view. And this is very important psychologically, because obviously what happens if somebody, you have got some criticisms about what somebody else believes, and that person says, well, you know, I really agree with you about this and that aspect of your opinion. And right away, the defensiveness settles down, the aggressiveness settles down, and in some of the archived TV interviews on the United Kingdom website, you see the body language of the interviewer completely changing. And one of them, I remember, he was just like loaded for bear. And the voice responded and pointed out something that he really accepted in the kind of the subtext of what the questioner was posing. And the guy just settled right back in his chair, and just right away, it was more of a space for the church's position to be presented. And interestingly, even though we're a post-Christian culture, what secular people find as moral values these days, in many cases, were Christian values, are Christian values. So there is almost always common ground there in the intentions behind any criticisms or challenging perspectives that other people take. Next is understanding sort of media smarts. So, you know, we all know what spinning a media story is. We don't like it when politicians do that. They sort of say what they want to say in answer to a question and has nothing to do with the question. So we don't do that in Catholic Voices, but we don't allow ourselves to be painted into a corner and feel sort of helpless and defensive. And I bet all of you have had conversations with friends when you have felt that way. You know, they have said something, and then you realize, oh, you know, I'm kind of getting, backing up here, and you know, I feel like I kind of got to fight my way out of the situation that they're putting me in, given how they are sort of framing the situation. And a brilliant example of reframing was given by our Lord in the parable that we were, not the parable, what he said about the coin and Caesar's or God's. Right? Because he refused to answer that question, to be bound by the frame that the Pharisees were imposing on him. He stepped right back and he answered it from a bigger perspective. And so that's precisely what Catholic Voices are trained to do. And this afternoon's presentation is on assisted suicide in particular, and I'll be giving a handout to, you know, show you how to do that and sort of take away messages that reframe it so that we can express our opinion on that. So, I sort of frame up, you know, in that other sense of the word. So what a frame is the basic terms of reference that we all have, the basic worldview. And very often it's unconscious. We don't know that's sort of square one for us. So when you're talking to somebody, this is one of the very first things to try to figure out, where are they coming from? So some of the most common secular frames of reference are these ones. You know, you're familiar with them if you sort of think about what the media does. They're always, you know, trying to stand up for the victim against the big institution. They often see like corporations as, you know, psychotic personalities versus the public good. You know, the sort of the idea, really the myth of progressivism. Everything in the past is, you know, no good anymore. Sort of a split between unthinking dogma and open-minded science. And then, you know, tradition, hidebound, middle-aged way of thinking versus, you know, real experiences that people have today. So, the next step in the Catholic Voices process is understanding the frame, criticism against the church or the disagreement with the church's position, then finding the positive value behind it, sort of a summary here, and then agreeing with whatever we can agree with from their point of view. And then sort of figuring out what we say next. And that takes work ahead of time. It's like what you as physicians have been advised to do. Don't wait until your patient says such and such in the office Think about it ahead of time. So that's exactly what the Catholic Voices training consists of. So, a couple of issues, just practice in your minds. What's the positive intention and what's the frame? Okay, so institutions, the reframing would be, the Catholic Church imposing its dogma on condoms, the corporate interest covering up the sexual abuse scandal. You sort of get the idea. Then the positive value in the people who are concerned about AIDS in Africa and profoundly concerned about anybody who's been sexually abused, that we can agree with wholeheartedly, 1,000%. Compassion. That's why they're indignant that some church members have done what they have done. And transparency. Nobody really wants cover-ups. It's not in anybody's best long-term interests. So those would be examples of finding the positive intention behind the other point of view or behind the criticism. Okay, so our little slogan, shedding light, not generating heat. And when we talk to people, we're there to clarify, not to battle. We're not getting into the culture war. We need to use, we intentionally use simple language, ordinary language. It's a bit of a handicap if you're really smart, if you're a doctor in a sense, or a lawyer, because you've got lots of technical vocabulary. And the average person on the street, their eyes are going to be glazing over, 10 seconds into what you're saying if you don't speak the words that they're used to and they understand commonly. And that goes for theological and scriptural terminology too. We believe in the Bible, but we don't use scripture to articulate our position, and we don't use theological terms that other people would be alienated by. So, who is our public? We think about it ahead of time. Okay, I'm going to be talking to Joe Blow on CBC. I know he has kind of a real issue with the Catholic Church. Or I'm talking to Mary Smith from the Sun newspaper in Vancouver. She wrote a very interesting column on Pope Francis's election. So, you have to know your public. If it's a friend you're talking to, okay, your brother-in-law who's got a real case against the church, or your sister who's a fallen away Catholic, or whatever. So think about them first of all, and what you can say to them specifically. And what we're doing is pre-evangelization. We're not speaking to people with the goal of instantly converting them once they have heard our wonderful, positive, supportive approach. We're sort of scattering seeds on the path which will be watered over time, and we'll go for coffee again with that person and continue the conversation, or I'll send another email to the guy at the Sun who writes the spirituality column, and he told me he didn't want to interview the author of the book, the founder of one of the co-founders of Catholic Voices when they came to Vancouver. Didn't have time, but I'm trying to cultivate a friendship with the guy, so sooner or later, maybe he'll ask me what the church's perspective is on something. That's what I'm hoping. So, pre-evangelization. Witnessing, not winning. It's not about you when you're talking to your friend. It's about what you're saying. Don't see them as the enemy. We've talked about that. It's very important to focus on what the church does that is positive, what our positive alternative is. For instance, something like gay marriage. What our positive alternative is with respect to physician-assisted dying. We must demonstrate that compassion and a positive alternative. And fascinatingly to me, when I grilled the guys in the UK about the debate that they were having when their government was forcing through the law in favor of same-sex marriage, he said they had never had any hate mail from the gay activists. I found that extraordinary. I couldn't believe it. But it was because they didn't propose anything personal. They weren't critical of gay rights, so-called. They were proposing what is the nature of marriage, that institution that serves best children and society as a whole. That's how they presented it. And so it was listened to. It was a total uphill battle if you see any of the archived interviews, but they didn't stir up a lot of negativity because of the way they put it out. Always being compassionate, human. That's really crucial, particularly with students. You know, I was a high school teacher for 28 years, and you know, I was sort of an intellectual type of guy. I labored under the illusion that reason is very persuasive. and I realized, well, no, it isn't. You know, it's emotion that's persuasive, and it's being self-evidently compassionate that is persuasive. You don't have to say anything really intelligent. You just have to appear sincerely, of course, to be a caring kind of a person. And I remember, my daughter's 25, and of course, at several moments in our relationship, I have said to her, you shouldn't be doing that, or you should be doing that, and this is why. And she, no, Dad, but why? So, well, just because I feel that's the right thing to do. Oh, you feel that way? Oh, okay. She accepted it. You know, I mean, it's amazing. So we need formation, how to be positive, find the positive intentions to be explicitly compassionate. And we need the information, which is what you are much more expert in than I am in you know, an issue like assisted suicide. You've got to have that clear in your mind, and you've got to have thought about it ahead of time, what the frame is, what the reframe is, these things that I've mentioned already. So, 10 principles of good communication are the last chapter in Austin's book there, looking for the positive intention. People won't remember what you said as much as how you made them feel. So, you know, as a teacher, again, I know within 24 hours, everybody that you've been teaching in class will forget 80% of what you've said. So I didn't shoot myself out of despair. I just knew that was the way human memory works. But if my students knew I liked them, if your patients know you care for them, that's what they'll remember. That's what they'll take away. And any sort of really hyper-rational arguments that you have given them about things won't carry as much weight with them as you could say sort of bedside manner or whatever it is. Checking your facts but avoiding robotics. Don't bombard people with statistics. A few are okay. Witnessing, not winning. You're not there to persuade everybody to believe what you believe instantaneously. Shedding light, not heat. Be compassionate. Not about you. Doesn't matter if in an interview you put your foot in your mouth. Because then people will think, oh, well, she's a Catholic or an evangelical. They're idiots anyways. She hasn't performed any worse than I would have expected her to perform. Hey, no problem. And you learn something as a spokesperson. Whereas if you do well, great. You know, it's great. It's a cherry on the ice cream. And you never will do it perfectly with your friends, people that you're talking to. You know, there's always better ways to explain. You know, your brother-in-law will bring up some criticism that you never dreamed of. So you're well, I don't know. So it's okay. It's just an opportunity to go back, regroup, think a little bit more, and then take them out for a drink again, and talk about it in a more effective way. Showing, not telling, and being positive, as opposed to attacking and being critical. So.
What's thinking in triangles?
Okay, that's when you only have, maybe 2 or 3 minutes in a media interview, or maybe, if you're going for coffee with a friend or a family member, you've got more time to talk about it, but you don't have the time to give them, for instance, a version of the presentation that we've heard here. So you go into your discussion, your interview with somebody with 3 things in mind, key messages, three talking points. So whatever the person's criticism or question or point of view is, you connect it with, you figure out which of your 3 points it will connect with. And that's the one you remember when you're sort of, semi-blanking out maybe a little bit, because it's kind of a challenging situation to be in. So that's what that is getting at. Does that make sense? Okay. And then, you can bring the other 2 points in later if they're starting to actually listen to you. But, you can't give them the whole encyclopedia on the situation. Okay, so we're reviving the art of apologetics for the era of 24-hour news and for talking to friends. And this is one very complimentary description that came up. I think it might have been John Allen, who, if you follow Vatican affairs, he's sort of the foremost English language commentator on that, and he described this as the new apologetics. So it's part of the new evangelization, the Catholic Church, which is re-evangelizing fallen away Catholics. That's what the new evangelization is. So that's what we're doing. We're talking to our friends and relatives who don't, maybe cultural Catholics, but don't understand what the church really teaches, don't practice it. So, and it's part of the new apologetics, so we're not getting feisty about it. It's a different approach to apologetics, but it's apologetics. It helps give us confidence in communicating with people, and it spreads the idea of the vocation of the Christian communicator. So that, as a kind of like a topic, has come out, hasn't it? We all have our specific vocations in the world. There's vocations to be a priest, vocation to be ministers, in our churches. Then there's also the vocation of teachers, the vocation of the physician, and there's the vocation of the Christian communicator. And that means grace. That means God is with us in a special way when we are doing that. So I think that is just about all I have to say. Thank you very much.